Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here with all of you today as we discuss the important topic of educator diversity and the state of our educator workforce. My name is Jorge Panjul, and I'm Latino for Education's Executive Director in Massachusetts. I only recently joined Latinos for Education, but I'll tell you, I am absolutely thrilled to be part of this team and its exciting work. As someone with deep experience in policy, particularly around equitable policy, I know firsthand how education is the core of many policies that lead to a community's success. And I know that when you allow communities of color to not only have a chance, but really tip the scales to provide additional support systems like a diverse educator workforce, which you'll hear about later today, that is what truly sees our communities succeed. At Latinos for Education, we like to say, when Latinos succeed, we all succeed. Today, you'll hear about how coming together to implement solutions to help us all succeed by supporting our communities of color by increasing educator diversity. I'm really excited, and I hope you are too, to hear about our guest today. And first, I am so excited to introduce our founder, our fearless leader, Amanda Fernandez, CEO and founder of Latinos for Education. Under her leadership, Latinos for Education has grown from a Boston-based nonprofit to a national leader on education policy, advocacy, and leadership development. Founded in 2016, Latinos for Education now has a coast-to-coast presence. Welcome, Amanda.
Gracias, Jorge. ¿Y qué tal a todo el mundo? Hello, everybody. It's so great to be here talking about such an important topic that obviously is near and dear to our hearts at Latinos for Education. Today, you will learn more about the findings in the report called In Pursuit of Greatness, Bold Strategies for a Strong and Diverse Educator Workforce. I'd first like to thank the Barr Foundation for funding this critical advocacy and research partnership that we have between MassInc and BU Wheelock. Our research partners at MassInc and BU Wheelock Education Policy Center will shortly discuss with you all where Massachusetts is, excuse me, relative to educator diversity and where we will be by the end of the decade. We will be joined by members of the Educator Diversity Act Coalition, who will be discussing the findings in this report and what it means for us here in the Commonwealth. As the lead of the Educator Diversity Act Coalition, we at Latinos for Education share the commitment with you and students of color in Massachusetts to see themselves reflected in their educators and school leaders. This coalition represents many stakeholders and institutions that play a role in shaping our state's educator workforce, including teachers, school leaders, teacher prep programs, higher ed institutions, and affinity groups. Educator diversity, as we know, is not just an education issue, it's an economic and workforce one as well. We know that by investing in educator diversity, we can create multiple opportunities for generations to come. What you'll learn about in this report today should serve as a call to action for all of us. As education leaders and policymakers, it is up to us to increase our efforts to diversify our educator workforce. We know that in order to close this pervasive opportunity gap in communities of color, we need to close the representation gap in educator diversity. As a community, it's critical to continue informing the public about this data that you'll soon hear about. It's up to all of us to continue talking about this. We will need to double down on our efforts to increase the number of diverse educators in the Commonwealth. That's pretty much the top line message that you will be hearing. While Massachusetts has always been a global leader on education, this state and our legislators are known for setting the agenda that others can follow. Through the solutions we propose today, we can continue that legacy as a Commonwealth. I'd like to extend a special welcome to Chairman Lewis, Representative Williams, Senator Gomez, and Representative Kushmarek for being here today. And I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you who joined us today, our panel of speakers, and I'll turn it back to you, Jorge, to continue the program. Thanks all.
And thank you, Amanda, for your steadfast dedication to this work and leadership, both at the national level and particularly here in the Commonwealth. and for your deep affirmation for the hard work that it took for all of the many folks that were involved to bring this call to action and turn it into the urgency of advocacy. The Educator Diversity Act is imperative for both healing the profession and ensuring that our Black and Brown children in particular, and all of our students, can benefit from diverse teachers, leading to more successes in the classroom. So it is a great pleasure for me to now introduce our colleagues and friends from Boston University's Wheelock Education Policy Center and MassInc. Today, we're joined by Cedra Baloche and Ben Foreman, respectively. I'll ask that you please describe yourselves briefly, what you do in your introductions and your organizations, and feel free to begin your presentations as soon as I'm done. Cedra, why don't we start with you first, followed by Ben?
Great. Thank you so much, Jorge, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much to Latinos for Education for giving me the opportunity to join this really important conversation about educator diversity in Massachusetts and how we can continue to improve together. So I am the Assistant Director of Policy at Boston University's Wheelock Educational Policy Center. Our focus is really on using rigorous research evidence to drive and inform policy change, not just in Massachusetts, but in other states and districts around the country as well. And today I'm really excited to share work that was led by two of my colleagues, Dr. Olivia Chi and Dr. Andrew Bacher Hicks, who are both assistant professors at Boston University. And we're really kind of spearheading a lot of the analysis that we're about to get into. So our contribution to this report really had two parts. So the first driving question was really working to understand trends in teacher diversity over the past decade in Massachusetts, and then using those historical patterns to predict how teacher diversity might continue to change through 2030. The second part was more exploratory. We asked what would happen if we could modify or pull various policy levers to recruit and or retain more teachers of color, and how would that change the overall racial composition of the workforce? And how close would we get to closing the quote unquote representation gap between teachers and students of color? So to help us understand these two driving questions, I will share a few highlights from our analysis. And of course, if you're interested in more detail, you can find a lot of that in the full report as well. Our first insight is that Massachusetts has been making progress towards increasing the diversity of the teacher workforce. So you'll see in the light blue bars in this graph, between 2012 and 2020, the percentage of teachers of color in the overall workforce in the state increased from 7% to 10%. And our analysis shows that if these trends were to continue forward through 2030, through the end of this decade, meaning that all of the collective mobilization, intentionality efforts to increase teacher diversity across the state were to continue forward as they have been on this positive trajectory, teachers of color would comprise about 14% of the workforce by 2030. So that would be double what we saw in 2012. Now, this is just a prediction. Another way to think about it is a forecast. And just like a weather forecast, those of us that are in Massachusetts know, they don't always pan out to be fully true. There's assumptions that are kind of built into these statistical models. So there's always a little bit of uncertainty in terms of what will actually pan out. But this is really intended to hopefully provide a useful baseline understanding of what could happen with teacher diversity, which will help us plan for the future. So while this figure illustrates some of our progress as a state, it also, I think, really clearly illustrates the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing. And one way to think about this is that the projected growth in the number of students of color, which is represented by the darker blue bars, is greatly outpacing and will continue to outpace the growth in teachers of color. So even while we're continuing to make progress over time, by 2030, we anticipate seeing an even larger discrepancy between these two groups, students of color and teachers of color in Massachusetts. Where do we see the greatest opportunity for improvement? I think the unsurprising answer to many of us is among new hires. So this figure shows that these overall increases to teacher diversity that we've been seeing in the workforce over the past decade have really been driven by increases in the proportion of newly hired teachers of color, from about 10% of newly hired teachers in 2012 to about 18% in 2022. So it seems like we should be thinking about how to leverage teacher recruitment policy to help us work towards our goal of increasing overall teacher diversity. And of course, we also know that teacher retention is very important and that teachers of color tend to leave the workforce at higher rates than white teachers. So it also makes sense to focus on retention as an important policy lever. And so in order to kind of explore this idea further, we conducted a series of policy simulations, essentially saying, how might teacher diversity increase above and beyond our baseline kind of predictions of what might happen in 2030 if we were to change the composition of newly hired teachers by like tweaking recruitment policies and or change the retention of teachers of color. So our faculty, Dr. Chi and Dr. Bakker-Hicks, created a statistical model that allowed us to predict or forecast how teacher diversity might look in 2030 under different recruitment and retention scenarios. So the next couple of slides highlight some of those key findings. So what you'll see in this graph is the dark blue portion of each of those bars represents the baseline projection for 2030 that we talked about in the previous slide. So I said 14%, I think more precisely 13.7% is what you see here. And that's what we expect teacher diversity to be in 2030 if our current existing efforts were to continue forward. The lighter blue sections of each bar show how much of an increase in teacher diversity we would expect to gain if we were to change certain specific teacher recruitment or retention parameters. So one thing I want to note is that these are really extremely ambitious scenarios that we've outlined here, where essentially like we're hiring every single potential teacher of color available in the state. We're retaining almost all of them every year, and we're doing all of that overnight. So we're sharing this as a way to kind of illustrate the highest bar that we could be reaching by 2030, not necessarily saying that these are proportions that we're likely to reach by 2030. So just to quickly walk us through, the leftmost bar is the first scenario where we're saying if we were to flip a switch overnight and retain all teachers of color at the same rate as white teachers, which is about 90%, we'd expect a small increase in the projected share of teachers of color. So baseline, we thought it would be 13.7%. We're expecting another 3 percentage points above that if we equalize retention. The next two bars illustrate what were to happen if we were to hire new teachers at the same demographic composition as either four-year college grads or high school grads in Massachusetts. So saying if you were to hire new teachers each year that match the racial composition of either of those two groups, how would you expect teacher diversity to increase by 2030? And then the last two bars combine the recruitment and retention scenarios. So you're doing everything you possibly can to hire as many diverse new teachers as you can, retain all of them at equal rates to white teachers. And in the most ambitious version of these scenarios, which again requires overnight intensive change, you would reach a projected share of a little over 26% teachers of color in 2030. This last figure, I think, helps highlight why it's so hard for these recruitment and retention policy levers to make a big dent in teacher diversity. So I think, we've been focusing a lot of our efforts as a state on those two sides of the policy spectrum. And I think when you see it laid out this way, you begin to understand why it's taking a long time to make the progress that I think we're all hoping to make together. So this is just a year-by-year breakdown. Each bar represents a year. This is the most ambitious policy scenario where you're equalizing the retention rates of teachers of color with white teachers and hiring new teachers who match the racial composition of college graduates. And you'll see like there is a change in demographics that compounds over time. So by the time you get to 2030, you do see a bump in the share of teachers of color, which is represented by the darker bars at the bottom. But what really sticks out, at least to me, is the large, persistent portion of the teacher workforce that is represented by returning white teachers. And so one way to think about this is the cohort of white teachers that can be retained each year is so much larger than the share of teachers of color who could be retained, that even if you're retaining everyone at equal high rates, it's hard to make a huge impact. It also doesn't leave much room to hire increasing numbers of teachers of color if you're retaining everyone, which, you know, retention is an important goal. So there's some trade-offs there as well. I just want to end by saying, I think in some ways this is a little bit of a bleak picture. I think I don't want it to sound like we're like discounting the importance of focusing on the policies that we've been focusing on for the past decade. I think if anything, it emphasizes how important it is to ensure that teachers of color feel supported, have positive school experiences, want to join the teacher workforce, want to remain in the teacher workforce. And so, you know, our baseline projections here assume that all of the work that we've been collectively doing as a state to ensure that that improves over time must continue. And as other colleagues will share, there's more that we can be doing, and we should continue to kind of renew our efforts and strengthen those efforts as well.
Thanks, Sujat. I will pick it up from here. My name's Ben Foreman. I'm the research director at MassInc. We are a small nonprofit public policy think tank. We work on many issues affecting the state of Massachusetts and communities, particularly our gateway cities, housing, economic development, workforce, and education. And you know, this project was especially important to us because for 20 years now, we've been looking at rates of college degree attainment among students of color and seeing the extremely large disparities not growing as our high school graduate population has become more and more students of color each year. Now we're at the point where half of our high school graduates are students of color. If they're completing college at half the rate of white students, and then those who complete college, students of color, are much less likely to enter the teaching profession, it means we're going to have a real challenge recruiting the skilled workforce we need to staff our schools. And, you know, as Jorge said at the outset, that's going to affect every one of us because we know teacher quality is the #1 sort of predictor of school performance and student outcomes. So we need to pursue bending these curves with real urgency because they affect everyone. They definitely are going to affect the productivity of our entire workforce. This is kind of all the workforce challenges we face, this is the #1. It's kind of like putting the mask on first. Let's make sure our teacher workforce is solid. That said, the evidence that same race matching is important to students of color is strong and getting stronger all the time. And so we think it's important when we think about goal setting to make sure that our districts that are disproportionately serving large, diverse student populations come first when it comes to staffing and making sure that they have a sufficient number of educators of color. Goal setting is something we thought about a lot in doing this research. It's really important to hold ourselves accountable by setting meaningful and achievable goals. And we've definitely seen that urban districts that have large numbers of students of color in many parts of the state have been successful at moving the needle and making their workforces more diverse and ensuring that students of color have several chances to learn from an educator of color along their K-12 journey. And the research is pretty clear that just one educator of color in K-12 can make a detectable difference in student outcomes. But when we get to, you know, upwards of 30% teachers of color in a school district, that's when students are likely to have several educators of color over their careers and have real opportunities to learn from those that share similar backgrounds and perspectives and cultures. So we think it's really important to focus our attention on those districts that are 70% more students of color, and only 10% of the educators today are educators of color, as we work to achieve a more parity across the educator workforce overall. Secondly, when we think about the efforts that have made a big difference in recent years, a lot of it comes down to alternative licensure, emergency licensure, lowering the barriers for entry to the profession. We've seen from DESE's efforts that that's been effective, and that the educators that have been recruited under alternative licensing approaches have been just as effective as those who come in under traditional licensing. So the Educator Diversity Act provides DESE with the authority to continue to use and evolve those multiple approaches to licensure. We think that's critically important to meeting our goals. The third piece is financial incentives. There's a huge body of research that shows financial incentives can make a real difference in encouraging people to enter the profession. Not a lot of this research deals with teachers of color, but I think it's common sense that if financial tools work overall, they're going to have special power with teachers of color, because they tend to carry more student debt. They tend to have more obligations to their families. So if we can make, especially the early years of teaching, where salaries are lower, more remunerative, we're going to have more success attracting and retaining college graduates of color into the profession. We also think there's a real opportunity to pair hiring bonuses, retention bonuses with early retirement incentives to make sure that the teachers who are at the end of their teaching careers, who are disproportionately white, and in many cases have had the final few years of their teaching particularly challenging with the COVID pandemic. If they're no longer fully invested in it, and a financial incentive will encourage them to retire early and open up the opportunity for others to enter the profession. We have a lot of evidence suggests that's going to lead to improved learning outcomes for all students, and students of color in particular. 4 and 5 have to do more with the pipeline and making sure that we have more college graduates of color, since all of the research shows that that is the part of the pipeline that narrows the most, is the very beginning portion. Early college is a proven strategy to dramatically increase post-secondary degree attainment, including 4-year degree attainment. We've been working on that in Massachusetts for a long time. We're really just beginning to scale it to the point where it's going to have the kind of impact that we would see on the teaching workforce. And we think there's a particularly important opportunity to create educator pathways and grow your own programs, leveraging all the effort that's been made in Massachusetts to create strong early college programs. I know Latinos for Education has been at the forefront in figuring out how that's going to work, and working with districts hands-on to create strong, high-quality pathways into education from early college. Similarly, a lot of states are working to create apprenticeship programs for adults that don't have 4-year degrees, but will need one to become teachers. And apprenticeship offers an opportunity for them to get paid while they work in school settings and earn their 4-year degrees, so that the economics work for it for people who have a family to support and can't go back to school. The availability of federal funding for those apprenticeships, which is relatively new, creates a real opening that Massachusetts, and I know the department is aggressively pursuing. The last two have to do with the ecosystem and how we all come together to get this job done. We know that nonprofits are a critically important part of this work. People who are providing educator prep programs, community-based educator prep programs, people who are working on affinity networks. All that grassroots work is critically important, but we need to resource it appropriately. We've had relatively small grants to do that work, and it's hard to build a high-performing nonprofit without the predictability of stable state funding. And lastly, thinking about how we get alignment across all these different programs. The state has regulatory authority to help ensure that, to the greatest extent possible, we're aligning standards as we create these different pathways and programs, so that students can clearly understand what they need to do to get into the profession, and and they're able to pursue those opportunities in a seamless way and in an efficient way, in a way that gets them to the destination as quickly as possible. So those are the 7 action items that we outline on the report. Many of these are covered by the Educator Diversity Act in one way or another. And I think that the work that Latinos for Education is doing, building community around these and helping us understand the urgency and the importance of this work is absolutely critical.
Right. Well, thank you, Sidra and Ben, for sharing this critical information with the webinar attendees and really for pointing to why the time for action is now. Now, we are going to have some time for questions and answers, but before we do that, we're going to have some legislator statements and reflections on the data and the presentation. Before I hand it off to our legislators to speak, I'd also like to recognize our some state representatives and offices that are joining us today in the room. I know I see that State Representative Jessica Giannino has joined, so thank you for joining. And we have representatives from the Office of State Representative Kate Lipper-Garabedian. Thank you for being here. So we are so fortunate today to be joined by our legislative partner, State Senator Jason Lewis, who serves as the Senate Chair of the Education Committee and our lead sponsor for the Educator Diversity Act in the Senate. Senator Lewis, we look forward to hearing you provide remarks and your reflections on the report findings and how it aligns with the Educator Diversity Act. Senator Lewis, we welcome you.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Wonderful to be with all of you today and to join my colleagues, Senator Gomez and Representative Cruz and Kushmerek, who are all wonderful champions for our diversity, equity, and inclusion work in our public schools. And I'm also just thrilled to carry the flag as the lead sponsor for the Educator Diversity Act, along with Representative Alice Paish on the House side. And been working together with her and with Latinos for Education and so many other wonderful members of this coalition for a number of years now. And really appreciate the contribution of this latest report, which I think really makes a significant, helps to significantly strengthen the already very strong case for the need to take legislative action in this space. I really want to express my gratitude to MassInc, to Latinos for Education, and to the BU Wheelock Educational Policy Center for your work here. I think we all well understand the strong evidence base for the academic and social emotional benefits to students of color in particular, but really to all students from having a more diverse educator workforce. In fact, we see a very strong data from a student of color having even one educator of color in his or her public school experience. And the existing mismatch between our educators of color and students of color, as we've see in this report, is expected to grow even further, and especially so if we don't take strong action. I do think it's also worth mentioning and celebrating a lot of good work that the legislature and former Baker administration, current Healy administration, DESE, and many of our school districts have been doing. I would very quickly just point to the passage of the Look Act back in 2017, very important for advancing the education of our English learners and our bilingual students. The passage of the Student Opportunity Act in 2019, and we are continuing to implement that law, which is dramatically increasing funding, especially for districts serving large proportions of English learners and lower income students. And obviously some of that funding is also being used to strengthen the educator workforce. Also, the Department of Education, I think, does deserve our appreciation and respect for all the different programs that they have developed and launched and expanded in recent years to also address the need for diversifying our workforce. And of course, many of our districts have taken a lot of steps on their own and are making some excellent progress. But of course, as we know, and as this report has really put an exclamation point to it, we need to do more. And that's exactly where the Educator Diversity Act comes in. It's a comprehensive piece of legislation. I think we've continued to strengthen the bill over the years. It is being very closely reviewed within the Education Committee. I think there's very strong support, for the bill in the Education Committee, and I believe broadly in the legislature. The bill currently has an extension until mid-March, because we just need a little more time to finish the work on the bill. But I'm very optimistic that we will be releasing the bill from the Education Committee favorably in the near future, and then hopefully it will continue on its journey within the House and the Senate. So I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues in the House and Senate on this legislation, and of course with Latinos for Education and all of the other partners that are part of the coalition and that are part of this very important work that we are all doing to strengthen our public education system. So thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to say a few words today.
And thank you, Senator Lewis. We appreciate your leadership and partnership and look forward to our continued work together to get the bill passed this session. As you've said, that the Educator Diversity Act is a critical lever to assessing so many more opportunities for academic success and the well-being of our students, and both short-term and long-term pipeline developments. So up next, I'm so excited to introduce our friend and distinguished State Senator Adam Gomez. Senator Gomez, welcome to the virtual stage. And Senator Gomez, we'll just ask that you please share with us your reflections on the report and talk about the educator diversity and importance of that educator diversity in Western Massachusetts and your district.
Well, first off, I want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. I think is fairly important. Obviously, being Latino, coming from a city that necessarily majority of the students that are in our school system here in the city of Springfield is over about almost just Latino, almost 70%. So this bill would have an extraordinary big impact. And as we gather here today to discuss the importance of the educator diversity within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and specifically, obviously, my perspective here in my Senate district with constructs the gateway cities of Springfield and Chicopee, it's crucial to acknowledge the significance of the representation of these schools, especially in our gateway cities. Diversity among educators play a vital role in shaping the education experience of our students. And we've seen within the data that we've seen if we invest and we put more of this opportunity and influencing our students to have what we've seen, even what Senator Lewis has said, even having one person of color as a teacher makes extraordinary leaps for individuals. I know that when I was in school, when I had someone that looked just like me that I can relate to, it kind of made me appreciate the class and the education that I was receiving even more. I think in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have made great strides in promoting diversity among our educators, but there is still a lot of work to do. We know that this isn't going to be easy, and we've heard from my colleague how we've been strengthening this bill through the years, and I have full confidence that what this legislature will deliver is going to be something that everyone is waiting for, but looking forward to passing. We must continue to prioritize on our recruitment and our retention. I, for one, wasn't one that kind of stayed in school the traditional way, and it took me a while. So listening to a little bit more of the report of continuing ed classes, or maybe college, but these also certificate courses that they can take to elevate using their experience in the workforce is important. And I think, specifically talking about Springfield and Chicopee, where a population is diverse and multicultural, I think it's especially important to have educators who can relate and understand the unique needs of our students by valuing and supporting educator diversity in our schools. And I know that we're trying to do the best that we can in Springfield. We're the first city, I think, in the Commonwealth that went free pre-K. And I know we have to look at all paths and walks of life when we come to our children, especially our children of color, that they're interacting with individuals, even at the smallest stage of their life, so even into higher learning. So then that person has that cultural competence and understanding and values that student even more. But to conclude, as we move forward, I think it lets us commit in creating an exclusive and equitable learning environment, and where all the students, regardless of their background, have the opportunity to thrive. And I think supporting this educator diversity bill led by my colleague, Jason Lewis, that this is something that is, one, a no-brainer, obviously, because I am from a diverse background, but also we know that when Latinos do well and people of color do well, then that means everyone else around us does just as good. So thank you for the opportunity. Big shout outs to Latinos for Education and obviously MassInc. And you're doing a fantastic job. And I'm going to try to leave you with these. We worked them out. Thank you, Jason Lewis. Thank you, Latinos for Education. You guys are amazing. Keep up the good work. You always have a partner here.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Gomez. And thanks for bringing the fireworks. Appreciate that levity. We're really honored to work with you and really appreciate your call to action there. Joining us now is Representative Michael Kaczmarek, who will also share his reflections, but also really some essential thoughts around teacher apprenticeships. And I did see the question in the chat. We'll get to that question later, but really looking at teacher apprenticeships, sir, as a representative, as a strategy for diversifying the educator workforce. So Rep. Kaczmarek, welcome.
Absolutely. So thankful to be here, and really thank you to Latinos for Education, MassInc, BU, Wheelock Policy Center, and all the other thought leaders who are joining us on the call, and certainly my friends and colleagues in the legislature. I am disappointed that I cannot compete with the fireworks brought by my colleague Senator Gomez. So I'm gonna have to get some notes from him afterwards on how to do these fireworks and my remarks and style moving forward. But certainly, while optimistic to see small signs of progress here, need to be really clear-eyed about really the data that we're seeing out of this report. And certainly the data helps us to make the most informed decisions and really underscores both the urgency and the importance of the work that we're doing and the conversations that we're having today. Certainly looking at those representation gaps and those widening gaps at that, is really staggering. And I don't have to look much further than in my own home city of Fitchburg, Massachusetts, where we have 75% of our student population who are identified as students of color, the vast majority of whom speak a language other than English when they're at home, yet only 12% of our teachers identify as teachers of color in the district. So that is a glaring more than 60-point representation gap. And the district has been working valiantly to introduce new programs and strategies aimed at chipping away at the gap, and things like creating an articulation agreement with Fitchburg State University right in their backyard to produce a tuition-free and accelerated program with a guaranteed job for Fitchburg students of color that graduate from Fitchburg State and then return right back into Fitchburg public schools, as well as trying to promote and ensure that there's leadership and accelerator programs for our teachers of color to be able to be promoted into leadership and into teacher administration within the public schools. Those are wonderful programs, and I think they'll have a meaningful result in the future. But we realize as a district and as a Commonwealth, those actions alone are simply not enough and will not decrease those gaps. And we know we can't go it alone as a district. And I'm really so proud to be a member of the House, which, under the leadership of Speaker Mariano, Chairman Michaelowicz, and Leader Peisch, has repeatedly acted to pass legislation and put critical resources towards educator diversity over these past several years. And I'm excited to be a part of the chamber that certainly is passionate about this topic. And that's exactly why I'm working and have filed a piece of legislation that is really modeled after a groundbreaking model the Department of Education and the state of Tennessee has introduced. And so my bill is H 528, an act relative to teacher pathways and educator diversity. It would create the first accelerated tuition-free teacher occupational apprenticeship program in the state and really in the nation, modeled on that successful pilot that was introduced in Tennessee. The idea is to really tap into those who are around the field of education who aspire to be there. For example, in my home district of Fitchburg, we have nearly 35% of our teachers, aides, and paraprofessionals who are of color. Many of whom aspire to have a classroom of their own and to be bachelor's and master's certified teachers. This would aim exactly at getting them into the workforce, paying them for the work that they're doing, giving them credits for the work that they're doing, and allowing them to have access to an accelerated program that would get them right back into the classroom quickly. I think we have the resources and the institutions to be able to do that, and I don't think there has ever been a moment more urgent or appropriate than now. And so truly just thankful to partner with Latinos for Education and so many of my other colleagues in the legislature and thought leaders here today. Thank you again for the opportunity.
And thank you, Rep. Kushmerek. As you said, teacher apprenticeships really are a vital piece of the puzzle. And we're very much looking forward to collaborating with you to make them a reality in the Commonwealth. So it is with great pleasure that I now want to invite a member of Nuestra Familia, State Representative Manny Cruz, to highlight his reflection and the importance of having a really linguistic, diverse workforce and potential opportunities to build student to educator pathways. Rep. Cruz, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jorge, and always a pleasure to be with my familia, Latinos for Education. You, Amanda, and Jackie continue to do such amazing work here in our Commonwealth. I'm so excited to be with you all. I want to thank my colleagues in the Senate, Senator Lewis, Senator Gomez, and Representative Kushmerek for their partnership and their prioritization of the Educator Diversity Act. I'm so proud to serve as the first Afro-Latino state representative for the city of Salem and the vice chair of the Salem School Committee, where I've done the work of sitting across the bargaining table and really working to diversify our educator pipeline. And I'm a major proponent of the Educator Diversity Act, so I want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues that we do have a comprehensive piece of legislation that is before us this session, and it is urgent that we proceed with doing all that we can to pass it, especially in light of the fact that we have so many educators, over 4,000 that are still on emergency licensure, seeking a pathway to certification and to remain in the profession. So we do have to do our part as a Commonwealth. And when I think about my experience and I reflect on this report and the findings, I'll say first that I'm not surprised that we would need to do the most aggressive modeling to even get close to the 25% 2030 goal. And when I think about my experience 13 years ago as a student in the Salem Public Schools, I only had 3 Latina teachers throughout my K through 12 experience. And when I think about Senora Lopez, Senora Garcia, and Senora Cole, they really affirmed my experiences in the classroom. They understood the language that I spoke at home, and they had high expectations of who I was. And when I think about the students in our public school district not having access to one same race teacher and that magic that I experienced, I recognize that is a tremendous disservice for all the reasons that have been stated around the research, but also because I think when we think about the research and what it says about our multilingual learners, that linguistic element of being able to have our students in dual language programs that are multilingual learners so that they can truly, 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 truly uplift the assets that they bring to the classroom, multiple languages, is critically important. And so when I think about the work that we've led in Salem, we're a district that has really done the work over the last 4 years. I know that today I'm joined by my superintendent, who's going to be on the panel later, Superintendent Stevens Reich, who we're very fortunate to have in Salem. But when I think about our journey in educator diversity, when he first got here, only 7% of our teachers were teachers of color, 8% of our paraprofessionals, 9% of our administrators. And across each of those areas over the last 5 years, we've been able to effectively double each of those numbers. So we're at about 14% educators of color, about 20% of our paras, or excuse me, 25% of our paras, and 15% of our administrators, which is really important for our kids. But right now we are a district that has only one dual language school, despite the fact that we serve significant population of multilingual learners. And so one of the things that, I would just uplift as we're thinking about the importance of diversifying the educator workforce is that when we talk about diversity, we also have to be talking about linguistic diversity. The reason why in the Commonwealth we're not seeing the adoption of dual language as an option across districts is because we don't have the staffing capacity and the number of educators that we need getting that dual language certification. And so I have filed legislation. It is H3947, an act relative to bilingual educators and dual language certifications. And what this bill would aim to do is do the second part of what the Look Act sought out to do, which is undo the true harm in the Brown tax that's been issued to our bilingual educators by creating pathways for up to $20,000 in additional compensation for educators who go out and get their dual language certifications and stay in districts that have dual language programs. It seeks to undo some of the harm within our language about how we talk about multilingualism. And rather than viewing it as a state as a deficit, talking about multilingualism as the ideal state for all of the children that we have in the Commonwealth. And then additionally, the bill would seek to also create some other incentives to get districts really thinking about the opportunities for professional development for our educators, and then some incentives to make them see a pathway towards bilingual education, but then also addressing some of the inequities that exist in current dual language programs. So as I think about the report, I hone in on one of the recommendations that really highlighted the need for a dual language pathway to really be solidified within the educator workforce. And my bill, I believe, can help us achieve that. It's ambitious. And at a time in which our Commonwealth is experiencing revenue declines, I do think that this is the right thing to do for our kids, and especially for multilingual learners in these dual language programs, which have been left behind. So I want to thank my friends at Latinos for Education for the opportunity to be able to be here today. And I look forward to working with you all to continue to uplift the findings of this report and the real policy solutions that will ensure that all of our students have mirrors and windows in the classroom that reflect their lived experiences.
Thank you, my friend, our friend, Rep. Cruz. We know how deeply you are committed to this issue, and I look forward to our continued work together. Siempre en la lucha, friend. And so I'm going to transition us to questions. But before I do that, let me just level set and give some thanks. Today, we heard from our legislators, our reporters, and our CEO. And now we want to really take this moment to not only thank them, but offer a brief pause in the program to take questions from any members of the media who may be in attendance. We'll take a few questions from the media in the chat. I see one question already in the chat. And so I'm going to ask, I see it's anonymous here, but I will read it and ask any of our speakers if they want to come off mute and answer. And I believe I mentioned earlier, it's on teacher apprenticeships. So let me read the question. Any thoughts on why teacher apprenticeships grow your own preparation models can support not only with increased recruitment, but also increased supports and increased success for candidates of color?
Apologize for the delay there on my end. Well, certainly, I think we've seen some efforts. I alluded to Fitchburg State University and Fitchburg Public Schools launching an articulated agreement just last year for a cohort of 25 tuition-free students and a guaranteed job upon successful completion. And so certainly, what we're seeing is what we hear from so many young individuals who maybe aspire quietly to join the ranks of educators. They're concerned. They don't see people who look like them, and they're concerned to be the only ones in their school system, or perhaps the only one in a particular school to be a person of color or a Spanish speaker among the ranks of the faculty. And so the more we can begin to chip away at that, the easier it becomes for the future generations and inspiring the next generation and the next generation and each succeeding graduating class. And so I think that journey towards pushing, 18 to 19-year-olds into four-year college degrees, that's wonderful. But, really, it's going to take us 8 or 10 years to get there, because it means starting at 8th grade and really trying to inspire 13 and 14-year-olds to see themselves as future educators. I think where apprenticeship can really be truly meaningful is we have people who are currently in our educational workforce, either as aides, as paraprofessionals, as substitutes, who have some level of educational experience or licensure or qualifications, yet because of the socioeconomics are unable to really achieve that dream. Very few are capable of walking away from their current income in order to enter a four-year degree and pursue licensure. And so I think really the idea of the apprenticeship is ensuring that we break down those barriers, those speed bumps and those hurdles along the way. I encourage them, continue to pay folks who are in the educational field, give them the resources to succeed while pursuing their degree, but also then ensuring that we're giving them credit and experiential credit for the time that they currently have in the classroom and as they're going through their program, to work side by side along current educators, many of whom they're already working with and in the classrooms with. And so I think we can see a tremendous success here and see it in short order too. Again, I mentioned, this 33% of paraprofessionals in my gateway city. And in some cases that percentage is so much higher, and it gives us an immediate population to be able to really leverage who's already in the field, has shown an aptitude and an inclination to spend a whole career here. We just need to help remove those barriers.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Kushmarek. I actually see you hit a very exciting topic there, because I see others wanting to come off to join in on educator pathways. I'm going to ask Ben Foreman to come in first.
Yeah, thanks, Jorge. I think, it's difficult to understate how important the financial barrier is in Massachusetts. I mean, there's lots of reasons why people don't enter teaching or pursue teaching, but money is a big part of the equation, given how expensive it is to live here. People envision themselves buying a home one day, starting a family. It's hard to do that if the entry-level salaries are low, and we have some data that suggests relative to other states, our entry-level salaries are lower compared to our salaries later on as you progress in teaching. And then also, for a long time, we've been well below average on state financial aid. And so, the power of these pathways is to lower that financial barrier. But I think there's design questions that we've got to really figure out. The tomorrow's educator scholarship could be a game changer, but it also can convert to debt if you don't become a teacher. And so I think we've got to be really thoughtful about how students are going to weigh that risk, which they'd be assuming, right? Not everybody who tries teaching out finds that it's the right fit. And so now if you're stuck with $100,000 a debt because you didn't teach for 5 years, to have that forgiven in Massachusetts, it could be challenging. So I think these pathways have a lot of potential to lower the financial barriers, but we've got to make sure that we've designed them in such a way that they fulfill their promise.
Thank you, Ben. And I know we have another representative wanting to get in. Let me just say for the record and for our reporter question, that was Ben Foreman from MassInc. Let me welcome Representative Manny Cruz that also wanted to come into that conversation.
Thank you so much, Jorge. As we think about student pathways and opportunities for apprenticeship, I really love that my colleague, Rep. Kushmer, pointed out paraprofessionals. I think we can also think about how we engage students earlier in the pipeline as well. So one of the opportunities that I'd just love to raise up as we think about pathways is the potential to create an educator pathway within the early college program, which is a dual enrollment program that is highly evidence-based, aimed at supporting first-generation to college students that are primarily Black, Latino, low income in our gateway cities and across the Commonwealth, and attaining a college degree by building up their skill sets, their confidence, and getting them on these college campuses and that exposure. But by building pathways within, for educators specifically within the program, what we really give ourselves the opportunity to do as a Commonwealth, if we were to take the goal that was set by the Massachusetts Alliance for Early College, which is to have 45,000 students enrolled in early college over the next several years, if you only got 10% of our students in that program to just choose an early college educator pathway, and we can get some of those students to decide in a really well-designed program that they want to become educators, what you can do is you can build in some of those earlier exposures in the classroom. We can start thinking about MTEL prep a lot earlier in the pipeline. And then we can also think about these apprenticeship opportunities, paid opportunities for these students so that they really actually get the opportunity to understand what it's like to be a teacher and an educator. And I had just the most remarkable experience earlier in this week to join the team at Latinos for Education on a site visit to a dual language school where I got to see some prospective educators of colors who were students talk about, I think, their interests in being able to go to college and to earn credit for free while they're still doing their practicums as high school students and enjoying the rich supports that are offered to them within their districts. So I do think, that would be just one thing that I would raise up as an opportunity for further consideration. And I know it's one of the recommendations that was outlined in the report.
Thank you, Rep. Cruz. Now, I do need to move us on to the Diversity Coalition panel, but before I do that, we're hearing a lot of calls to action here. And our legislators emphasize how important it is for those of us on the ground to really get mobilized by reaching out to our legislators and asking them to support the Educator Diversity Act. We cannot wait. We simply cannot wait to take urgent action. You're hearing it on today's webinar. You're hearing it from our legislators. You're hearing it from our subject matter experts, and you're hearing it from Latinos for Education. And that's actually why now I'm going to be asking all of you to take a moment to do this very, very important thing now. And in this chat, you're going to find a link to our digital advocacy campaign to request legislators to co-sponsor the Educator Diversity Act. So our team will put that on, and we'll continue with our program and our panel. But I really do hope that you will take a moment to please join our action network. With that, we know that diversifying the educator pipeline is going to take work. That's why our coalition is proud to not only advocate for this issue, but to have practitioners across the educator pipeline who are helping to create systemic changes across the Commonwealth. I'm pleased to elevate our coalition members in our dynamic Educator Diversity Coalition panel. This panel includes critical members of our coalition who are operating across the educator pipeline, really looking at the entire ecosystem. And so I'm going to be asking each of them to briefly introduce themselves, the names of their organizations, and a brief synopsis of where they fall in the work of educator pipelines. I'm going to begin with Leah, if you wouldn't mind starting us off. Ms. Leah Serena from Boston Public Schools.
Hi, everybody. My name is Leah Serena. I am the elementary rep for the Boston Teachers Union, previously a Boston Public Schools second grade teacher, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys today.
Okay. Dr. Stacy Shuzzle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stacy Sushel. I'm an associate dean at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, focusing on online education, accreditation, and licensure. I'm also School of Ed faculty. What brings me to this work is trying to build robust pathways in Lawrence Public Schools and Lowell Public Schools, and working on a statewide model that allows for early college transfer for education credits into any credit-bearing four-year institution. So really opening up a pathway that is flexible and statewide. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. We've mentioned him already. Representative Cruz mentioned Superintendent Stevens Reich.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Steve Reich. I'm currently the superintendent of schools in Salem. I've served as a superintendent in multiple districts in Massachusetts, including in Western Mass. But I've also been a teacher and a principal in the state as well. And as a school district, this is a huge priority for us, and happy and excited to talk about the work.
Great. Thank you all. I'm going to ask, I guess, some prompting questions. And Leah, I'm going to start with you. We want to make sure, if that's okay. Leah, we want to make sure that we capture your voice on both the educator space and as a union leader. And as a classroom teacher, what are your reflections on the findings and recommendations of the report? Specifically, what are some of the policy and practice changes that you would advocate from your perspective as an educator to ensure that we're retaining and recruiting more educators of color?
Thank you. I can definitely give both perspectives. I am excited to see this report. In my 15 years in education, it has been one of my number one priorities is to think about how we retain educators of color specifically. And I definitely think that my pathway to education was one that a lot of this bill would support. I did Tomorrow's Teachers Club when I was in high school, and the greatest opportunity of my high school career was that I spent the summer in schools being a teacher assistant to a teacher. So I really got that hands-on experience. And then I went to a pathways program for my master's for education in my town and was able to get that experience. And I'm also an educator who, I was teaching on a waiver and failed my MTELs, I don't even know how many times. So when I think about my story and how I get here, I definitely feel blessed that I was given opportunities like the ones that are created through this bill and the ones that we really need. We really need alternative licensure programs. We really need opportunities for that hands-on experience. My first year teaching, I was the only Black teacher in the whole building, and I taught an emotionally impaired sub-separate classroom with 10 Black boys, Black and brown boys, excuse me. And I really wanted someone to lean on. And there were amazing teachers in my buildings. But when I wanted to have the real conversations about how we got here, how we are over-identifying students of color, how I can support these students in ways that are for them, I wanted teachers who understood that. And I was calling other educators who I had who were like my students and were like me. And I think it's really important that we're able to do that. And when I think about policy, especially from the union perspective, policy is how we got here. We did not get here without policy change. We lost educators of color because of policy. So the only way to change that is through policy. And that's why we're always advocating to increase the number of educators of color. And the one that excites me the most is definitely thinking about culture and climate, because we can bring them in, but if we haven't changed the conditions to sustain them, then it's not going to last. So we really need to be thinking about the culture and climate of the building, of the other educators, of administration, union leadership, all of those things and how that can come together to support retaining educators.
Thank you, Leah. I think that certainly speaks truth to power. And again, we appreciate your service in the space. Thank you. And my next question, prompting question here, is for Dr. Stacy Shazel. And so we know, Doctor, that educator preparation will play a huge role in whether or not the state and Commonwealth can accelerate the diversification of educator workforce. Currently, the educator preparation programs around the Commonwealth are really not reflective of the state population, of the student population rather. Could you highlight some of the needed policy and practice changes of the educator preparation program that are necessary to transform our educator workforce to be more reflective of our students' diversity?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm going to speak to what came up a minute ago around teacher apprenticeships and grow your own. But first, I do just want to say that we make it a priority. And when I say we, I mean traditional university-based teacher preparation. When we build programs around liberatory agency building pedagogies, they empower and they validate students. And we also do it when we hire, protect, and nurture faculty and staff from racially, linguistically, and culturally diverse backgrounds. We have to do better. We have not done a good job at this ever. And we know that we've done a poor job with students of color because program personnel, at least in large part, program personnel are overwhelmingly white, and program curriculum and instructional practices tend to center whiteness and whiteness norms. So we make it a priority when we push against these things and we challenge ourselves to do better. We also make it a priority when we partner meaningfully with community-based organizations that show us every day what it looks like to lift up youth of color. I do think that we reimagine what teacher prep is when we think about grow your own and when we think about apprenticeship models. And I think we have to. So we work for educational justice when we expand our reach to middle and high school students, because that's where the next generation of teachers are. They are in high schools, they are in our public schools, whether they're current students or paraprofessionals. So we have to make it our work to invest in community-driven and pre-collegiate early college grow your own models. That could extend into teacher apprenticeships, that these conceptually ground teacher preparation in grassroots racial injustice movements. So we have to think differently about where teacher prep starts, who it involves, who has cultural capital, and who has knowledge that matters. So it means that I want to talk a little bit more about what a grow your own educator pathway would look like. So it means really working alongside with district and community partners that starts with promoting career exploration and promoting teaching as a noble and courageous profession as early as middle school. Middle school, elementary school, it means making sure that students early in the pathway have opportunities to work with mentors and teachers who look like them. It means that students receive academic advising and academic support beginning in middle school. It means that high school students have opportunities to engage in paid internships and to accumulate a considerable amount of college credit. It means that we dedicate endowment funding to supporting students of color to cover tuition costs, to cover course materials, testing fees, licensure fees. It means paying them during their practicum. It means looking to a competency-based model of assessment that recognizes prior experience. We have to have partners with the state. We have to be better partners and agitators in teacher prep. We have to work against and in a system that we know has harmful policies. So how can we agitate with the state to move toward a competency-based model? If the state vision for educator prep centers authentic and experiential learning, how do we square that with continued practices that run counter to that vision, like the use of licensure tests? We know this is a barrier. So how do we both play within the system and agitate against the system? We have to be more visible in our work. It also means that if we're supporting teacher apprenticeships and grow your own pathways, if that's part of the teacher education, if that is reimagined teacher preparation, then it means that we also have to look at the way that schools are organized. There's a deep literature base that tells us schools are not organized to promote teacher learning, and therefore they're not organized to promote teacher candidate learning. So what is our role in supporting schools in becoming places where teachers can learn and grow in meaningful ways? So I think it's the job of teacher prep to work closely with K-12 and community colleges to engage in reimagining what it would look like for schools to be teacher workplaces that promote learning. It also means engaging DESE around this conversation. How can we use more meaningful forms of accountability to promote teacher learning and to promote organizational structures that are in line with teacher learning? So there's a lot of work to do. I'm frankly very excited about the work ahead of us. I think it's time we reimagine teacher prep because we've failed for too long. I'll stop there.
No, that was great, Dr. Shazel. I want to say two things that stand out there is one, really just your candor and just really telling us what is going on from your perspective and just your honesty. And also agitation. We say that a lot at Latinos for Education, agitate when necessary. Many have heard us say that it is our mantra, and so very much connects with all of us here, and why it's so important to keep really putting the pressure on this campaign. With that, Dr. Steve Zreich, I have one of our last prompting questions here for you. Dr. Zreich, we have led incredible efforts alongside you, and really through your tutelage in your role as the current superintendent in the Salem Public Schools system, where you've been really seen at near doubling of the educators of color. And I know you've made this a top priority. Can you please share with us your reflections on the findings of the report, but also I think your very important vantage point as a district leader, and what are the tools you and your counterparts most immediately need to continue to diversify the educator workforce?
Yeah, thank you. You know, as a Cuban American who's lived in this state almost my entire life, I'm really proud to read about the accomplishments that we've made across the state to hire more staff who reflect the diversity of our student population. And I do commend the efforts of the Department of Education, state lawmakers, many of whom are here today, and hiring managers to establish alternative and flexible pathways that have, allowed more students to be educated by folks that look like them, that reflect the racial, ethnic, and linguistic backgrounds of the residents of the state. But as you've heard today, we have to do more. As the report calls out, the percentage of students of color is outpacing the percentage of educators of color. And to see that the discrepancies will continue to become more disproportionate is disheartening. The urgency is acute, and given my experience and research that matches the experience, it clearly points to the immeasurable impact that a more diverse workforce has on all students, not just students of color, but white students as well. Through my lens as a superintendent in multiple districts and as a principal in the Boston Public Schools, a rise in the number of staff of color has always resulted in a decrease in chronic absenteeism, a reduction in discipline, disproportionality, higher levels of engagement for students, and improved achievement. And I should also mention stronger relationships with the families that we serve. While all students benefit, from being taught by an educator of color, the research on the impact for students of color is astounding. It reveals that when taught by teachers of color, students of color have better academic performance, improved graduation rates, and are more likely to attend college. So it certainly matches the experience that I've had. And then the data also suggests that white students show improved problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity when they have diverse teachers. So you ask about what I think are the most or the highest leverage actions that can be taken. And I do want to highlight just 3 of the strategies that I think, in my humble opinion, will have the most significant impact on changing the workforce. First of all, I think it is an important statement to the community that school districts and district leaders like myself have explicit goals for both increasing the percentage of staff of color and retaining staff of color in their district. I think it speaks volumes about what is most valued and puts a stake in the ground for hiring managers and hiring teams, both around motivation and urgency, but of course, accountability to make substantial progress as soon as possible. I think it's been mentioned here before, but I think I really believe that grow your own, and by that I both mean of our student population, our current students, but also of paraprofessionals, folks that live in the community, that are dedicated to the city, cities like Salem, this is their hometown. We need to invest in them to become our future educators, by helping to offset the cost of higher education. I think with the right incentives and conversations I've had with our staff and our young people, they tell us that they would come back to their hometown to educate the next generation. That's important to their values, and certainly if the incentives are there, they would be willing to commit to the community that has given so much to them. I also think, again, it's been also mentioned before, the alternative paths to certification are absolutely essential, that don't necessarily require passing the MTEL. I've worked with too many gifted educators who were not able to pass what I believe is a flawed assessment, but are absolute magic with students. We have to consider portfolios, emergency licensure, competency determinations, and waivers as other paths into the profession. There's not a lot of good that came out of the pandemic, but one of the best aspects of it is the flexibility that have allowed in Salem, we've seen it, a much more diverse workforce to enter our schools. And that has only been to the advantage of our young people and the enrichment of our schools and school community. So in my opinion, we've got more to aggressively diversifying the workforce is among the highest leverage and best investments that we can make as a Commonwealth. I think the time is now for us to take action on behalf of the children we serve, who simply cannot wait for us to take action. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zweig, and thank you so much for making us so proud every day for the work that you do in Salem. And speaking of making us proud, I am incredibly proud to introduce our next speaker, who's going to from my team here in Massachusetts, our new policy and advocacy director, Jacqueline Monteroso, who's going to talk to you all about what's next.
Hi, Jorge. Thank you so much. I'm making sure that I'm managing the tech and I'm also speaking. So bear with me all to make sure that you can all see me. Okay, great. Thank you all so much. As Jorge said, I'm the new director of Policy and Advocacy at Latinos for Education. My name is Jacqueline Monteroso, and I actually began my education career as a kindergarten teacher. I also currently serve right now as the vice chair of the Revere School Committee, and I'm actually the first Latina ever elected in Revere. I became a teacher and ran for office because growing up, I never had an educator or a leader who looked like me. And to this day, I still have graduating seniors in Revere that share that they've never had an educator that looks like them throughout their entire K-12 experience. And just yesterday, I was visiting a school in Lynn, and in a focus group with graduating Latina seniors, only one raised her hand when I asked if she's had a Latina educator, paraprofessional, or guidance counselor. And so the opportunity to have educators that look like us shouldn't be 1 in a million for our students. It should be the norm. So as Jorge said, what's next? You're all here today because you believe in our mission at Latinos for Education, and you believe in our drive to increase the educator diversity in our schools. And so the 7 recommendations that you heard really point to the Educator Diversity Act, which our organization is trying to get passed this legislative session. So on the screen, you'll see our most immediate call to action, which is to sign on to a letter to urge our legislative leadership to push the bill out of the Education Committee through a favorable report out, and then pushing for a floor vote as well. So you can scan this QR code. I put the link in the chat, but I'll also drop it in there again for anyone that lost it. And then you can also download our report. We just spent an hour and a half speaking to you about it. So please scan this. I'll put the link in the chat for you to directly download the report as well, so you can have it. And then after the webinar, we will follow up with everyone who registered via email to send you the recording of this webinar, the report, the link again to our letter, so that you can sign on to our legislators, and more immediate action steps that you can take, so that it's not a 1 in a million chance for our students, but it's actually the norm. It's time for you to step into your power in your leadership, so that we can make windows and mirrors for all our students in the Commonwealth. So thank you so much, and back to you, Jorge.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And thank you again, because today would not have been made possible without your efforts. And Jacqueline and I look forward to connecting with many of you, hopefully all of you that have not joined the coalition and want to be part of this amazing work. We will be connecting with you shortly. You've gotten 2 cues now to have this call to action. We welcome you and want to stand shoulder to shoulder with you to agitate when necessary. And so I'm really, really, really excited, and thank you all for your leadership, and I look forward to our continued collaboration. I am thrilled to introduce our closing speaker for the evening, our friend and fellow coalition member, Andrea Zayas, the Executive Director of Journey into Education and Teaching, and a member of President Biden's Advisory Commission on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Hispanics. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jorge. It's great to be here with you all tonight. Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity. I have the honor of serving as one of the 21 commissioners appointed to this committee on educational equity, excellence, and economic mobility for Hispanics, but also as executive director for JET here. It's a small nonprofit in Massachusetts dedicated to growing the capacity of our ethnically, racially diverse paraprofessionals so that they can complete their journeys and become licensed educators. And as such, I want to share a few highlights that demonstrate how we here in Massachusetts continue to lead the nation in many ways, but also still have a long way to go, as this important report reminds us. And the headlines tell it all. We've made progress, but we haven't kept pace with the existing and growing diversity of our students. The increase in educator diversity has not been equally distributed across the state, and troublingly so. If the status quo trends hold, the representation gap will actually only widen by 2030. These headlines remind me of a leadership book I read many years ago titled, "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." So essentially, if we continue doing what we're doing, we will actually fall farther and farther behind. So we have to urgently change our policies, our biased practices, our procedures, and our habits of practice that have led us to having really, really good progress in some places like Salem, right? And having really, really decent outcomes, doubling in many places our teachers of color. We need, however, at this point, exponential growth in our pool of Black, Afro-Latino, Indigenous Latinx, and other Latinx and BIPOC educators, because incremental at this point is insufficient. So what got us here won't get us there. We need to be doing something more and different. And I really have appreciated hearing so many of the strategies that the presenters have talked about tonight and all of what's laid out in the report. What are our peers across the country doing, and what's recommended? Well, first and foremost, removing financial and other barriers to the maximum extent possible. We've seen this even in Tennessee, where it's possible through their registered apprenticeship program to become a teacher with absolutely no debt and to be paid during your practicum. I really appreciate Dr. Sechel naming white normativity as a barrier in teacher prep, and I'll add that it's a barrier to retaining our teachers of color when they're in the classroom, what their experience is like working in that school culture, in that district culture, with their principal, with their supervisors, what kind of professional learning opportunities they have. Critically important. So in addition to our efforts to diversify the hiring of the incoming workforce, let's also continue to think about how we nurture, retain our current teachers of color who share their students' identities. If we don't protect the advances that we've recently made, we run the risk of this gap widening even before 2030, right? We have many pink slips out there right now, many of them teachers of color. Ben, I'd love to run a projection on what that looks like if we added in the current pink slips. Registered apprenticeship programs, the Tennessee model. So glad to see that we're going to be getting this in Massachusetts. So shout out to the National Center of Grow Your Own and their partnership with DESE and the Center for Strategic Initiatives. This creates a possibility for community members to become educators with no debt, again, and to earn a wage while completing their degree. It is game-changing. We also have to look at compensation for our educators. And we have to keep pace, not only with inflation, but we have to do all we can as policymakers and as practitioners to ensure that we are creating a high reward career that folks want to stay in the long term. With the cost of living increasing the way that it has, have we done enough to retain our teachers of quality? On the MTEL, by 2025, we'll have an adjusted or revised MTEL, and hopefully it'll be in the direction of an experiential model, and it really cannot come soon enough. So in the meantime, are we providing vouchers and professional learning and supports? Sorry, I'm in a classroom that just lost its lights. I apologize for that.
No worry, no worry.
Okay.
I love that you said you're in a classroom.
Yes, I'm in a classroom.
You're on message. You're on message.
Teaching my future teachers here at BU Wheelock. Just to wrap up, deep partnerships with community to create these grow your own and registered apprenticeship models, valuing the prior experience that our paras and others bring to their work, and paying our educators during their preparation. These are game-changing and fairly simple, straightforward, equity-based solutions. For our current school and district leaders, setting goals, which Steve talked a little bit about earlier, setting goals around student-teacher race match with a focus on priority districts and populations is something over which we have agency today. We actually don't have to wait for the law to change. We don't have to wait for the law to come on from on high from DESE to start doing that which we know matters, because we measure what matters to us. So measure it, be transparent, and let's hold ourselves accountable to ensuring that our students of color have race-matched teachers of quality. So thank you to Wheelock Policy Center, MassInc, and Latinos for Ed, and our whole coalition for spearheading the EDA and for this important report. And Jorge, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for raising the importance of community-based educator pipelines. We are eternally grateful for your leadership in DC at the national level as well. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I see that we've actually answered all of the questions that we had on the chat, but if there are any more that come up, as is the case, maybe you start to think about more questions as once we're done today, you can feel free to contact us at Latinos for Education. All of our socials are there. Make sure to also, if you're gonna tweet about today, hashtag con ganas we can, and we will respond to you. So with that, it has truly been a pleasure. This was my first webinar at Latinos for Education as the executive director. And so I want to thank the speakers, the legislators, all of you attendees, and our amazing Educator Diversity Coalition for all that you've done and will continue to do to support this very important work. And most importantly, emphasize the importance of the students who really need, and you've heard many of us say this, need mirrors in the classroom. They need to see teachers that really are them in the most real and true way. And so making sure that those mirrors in the classroom are truly mentors that they can emulate and connect with is really what educator diversity is about. So I will ask that you please continue to advocate for the passage of the Educator Diversity Act and the policy proposals that you heard about today. You will get emails from me, you will get emails from our amazing team led by Jacqueline Monteroso. And so thank you again for all of you attending. Thank you to our president, CEO, and founder, Amanda Fernandez, for just really creating this organization and shepherding this through, really having a home for this work to truly happen in the Commonwealth, I think is just amazing. So we will share out a copy of this recording, the slides that were presented, and please don't forget our call to action. That is the most important thing you can do right now if you are galvanized to just really get active about this right now at this moment. Join our action network, sign our petition, The QR code is there, the link is there, and we will see you in La Lucha. Thank you very much for joining, and I'll see you out there.